For 60 years, I believed my childhood memories were lost to pneumonia. A single casual sentence from my doctor revealed my entire life was a lie, carefully constructed by my own family. Make sure you subscribe because the real story of who I am is more shocking than you can possibly imagine. My life, for the 60 years I've been aware of it, has been a quiet, predictable river. There are gentle bends and the occasional patch of slightly faster water, but for the most part it has flowed steadily, peacefully between well-defined banks. I have a loving husband, 2 grown children, and now a beautiful baby granddaughter named Lily. My childhood, as it was always told to me, was similarly unremarkable, save for one dramatic event. A severe case of pneumonia at age 8 that left me with a Swiss cheese memory of my earliest years. It was the family's foundational myth, the explanation for why I couldn't recall my first-grade teacher's name or the layout of the house we supposedly lived in before moving to Wisconsin. I never had a reason to question it. Until last Tuesday. It was a routine checkup with a new, younger doctor, a man whose eyes were more focused on the tablet in his hands than on the patient before him, Dr. Evans. He was reviewing the results of a brain scan I'd had a month prior for some persistent headaches. He swiped through the images with a detached professionalism. "Well, Eleanor," he said, finally looking up at me over his glasses. "But good news is there's nothing on here to explain your headaches. No tumors, no signs of an aneurysm. Everything looks perfectly healthy." He paused, tapping a spot on the screen. "And that old parietal fracture healed up beautifully. Clean line. Whoever stitched you up back then did a fine job." I blinked. "I'm sorry, a fracture? You must be looking at the wrong patient's file, doctor. I've never had a head injury in my life." He frowned, tapping his stylus on the screen again. "Are you sure? It's right here. A classic healed hairline fracture, consistent with significant head trauma from childhood. See that faint line right there?" He turned the tablet towards me. I stared at the ghostly gray image of the inside of my own head, at a faint, spidery white line he was indicating. It meant nothing to me. "No," I said, a strange, cold feeling beginning to creep up my spine. "The only serious illness I had as a child was pneumonia, a very bad case when I was 8. My parents said it gave me a fever so high it affected my memory of things before that." Dr. Evans' brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked from the screen to me and back again. "Eleanor," he said gently, his professional detachment replaced by a flicker of concern, "pneumonia is a lung infection. It doesn't fracture your skull." The drive to my mother's house was a blur. The quiet, predictable river of my life had just revealed a hidden, jagged rock beneath the surface. My mother, now 86 and a widow for 5 years, lived in the same small, tidy house I'd grown up in. She was in the kitchen, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but still capable, methodically kneading dough for her weekly bread. "Eleanor, honey, what a surprise," she said, a warm, genuine smile lighting up her face as I walked in. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I couldn't. "Mom," I said, my voice sounding tight and foreign in my own ears. "I was just at the doctor. He was looking at a brain scan. He said I have a healed fracture on my skull from childhood. He said it was from a serious head injury." Her face fell. Her hands stopped moving, frozen in the lump of dough. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic flickered in her eyes before being quickly masked by a look of dismissive annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "Doctors, they find one little thing and make a mountain out of a molehill. It was nothing." "It was a skull fracture, Mom. That's not nothing," I insisted, my heart starting to pound. "You fell," she said, finally looking at me, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. They darted around the kitchen, landing on the spice rack, the calendar, anywhere but on my face. "You were on the swings at the park. You swung too high and fell off the pole, hit your head on the metal pole. There was a lot of fuss, a trip to the emergency room. You were out of sorts for a few days. We didn't tell you it was a fracture because you were a sensitive child. We didn't want to frighten you. That's all it was. It was the pneumonia later that year that was the real problem." I stared at her. Every word she said felt wrong. It was a performance, a flimsy, poorly rehearsed play she was desperately trying to get through. The nervous flutter of her hands, the way she kept wiping them on her apron, the frantic, searching quality of her gaze, it was the unmistakable dance of someone telling a lie, a very, very big lie. I drove away from my mother's house with a cold knot of dread in my stomach. She hadn't just misremembered. She had actively, deliberately, and very badly lied to me. The story of my childhood wasn't a faded memory. It was a fabrication, a carefully constructed wall built to hide something else. And the little girl who supposedly fell off a swing? I had a sudden, chilling certainty that she never existed at all. My real past was out there, buried under decades of loving deception, and I knew, with a terror that was quickly turning to resolve, that I had to be the one to start digging. My mother's lie was a splinter in my mind. For days, I couldn't dislodge it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her nervous, fluttering hands and her eyes that wouldn't meet mine. A fall from a swing. It was such a flimsy, pathetic story, a poorly patched hole in the fabric of my reality. And the more I picked at it, the more the fabric seemed to unravel. My husband, Tom, noticed my distraction. "You seem a million miles away, El," he said one evening, his kind eyes filled with concern. "I think I need to take a trip," I heard myself say, the decision forming as the words left my mouth. "To Somerset, Ohio, the town we lived in before we moved here. I feel like I need to see it again. Maybe it will jog some memories." He accepted it without question, ever the trusting husband. He had no idea I wasn't searching for a memory. I was searching for a lie. The 7-hour drive from Wisconsin to Ohio was a journey into a strange, gray fog of anxiety. With every mile marker that passed, a voice in my head grew louder, a frantic whisper that asked the same terrifying questions over and over. What if you find nothing? What if you're making this all up? What if you are the one who is losing your mind? I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and just kept driving, propelled by a desperate need to know. When I finally pulled into Somerset, it was exactly as I'd pictured it from my parents' stories. A quaint, sleepy Midwestern town with a charming town square, a white steepled church, and streets lined with ancient oak trees. It was idyllic. It was perfect. And it felt completely, utterly alien to me. I drove to the address my mother had always cited as our first home, 412 Maple Street. It was a lovely blue colonial house with a sprawling front porch. I parked across the street and just stared at it, waiting for a flicker with something, a memory, a feeling, anything. Nothing came. It was just a house. I drove past the elementary school, a squat brick building named Northwood Elementary. I drove to the town park and stared at the swing set, its chains glinting in the afternoon sun. I felt no connection, no nostalgia. It was like looking at a postcard from a place I'd never been. The feeling of dread in my stomach began to curdle into a cold, hard certainty. My last hope was the public library, a stately brick building just off the town square. Inside, it smelled of dust and decaying paper, the scent of history. I found a kind, elderly librarian with a soft voice and hair the color of dandelion fluff. "I was hoping you could help me," I began, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. "I grew up here, but my family moved away when I was 8, back in 1971. I was wondering if you had any old school yearbooks from Northwood Elementary around that time." Of course, dear, she said, leading me to a dim, dusty room in the back. Our whole archive is in here. For the next 2 hours, I sat at a heavy oak table, poring over the yearbooks from 1968 to 1971. I scanned every class photo, from kindergarten to third grade, my eyes searching desperately for a little girl with my face. I looked for my name, Eleanor Price, in the class lists. Nothing. It was as if I had been a ghost in my own school. My hands were trembling now. "Excuse me," I said to the librarian, my voice hoarse. "Do you also have archives of the local newspaper, the Somerset Sentinel?" She showed me to a large microfiche machine. I spent another hour scrolling through the grainy black and white pages of the papers from the summer of 1971. The summer I supposedly fell from the swing and fractured my skull. I searched for any mention of an accident in the park, any small report about a child named Eleanor Price being taken to the hospital. There was nothing. No school records, no newspaper articles. No trace that the Price family or a little girl named Eleanor had ever existed within the borders of this town. I stumbled out of the library into the late afternoon sun, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood on the sidewalk, a stranger in a town that was supposed to be my home, a town that held no memory of me because I had never been there. The dusty archives didn't hold a faded memory. They held a void. My family hadn't just lied about a scar. They had invented a reality. My childhood wasn't forgotten. It was a forgery. And if I didn't grow up here, then where in God's name did I come from? The search for a forgotten memory had just turned into a search for a stolen life. The 7-hour drive back to Wisconsin felt like crossing an ocean. I had driven to Ohio searching for a past and found a void. The person I thought I was for 60 years, Eleanor Price from Somerset, was a phantom, a character in a play I never knew I was performing. The anger that had been slowly simmering inside me during my search now cooled into something harder, heavier, a cold, dense ball of resolve in the pit of my stomach. They had lied about the scar. They had lied about the town. I was done with whispers and gentle questions. I was going to get an answer. I didn't even go home first. I drove directly from the highway to my brother Michael's house in the suburbs, a place of manicured lawns and oppressive quiet. He was in his driveway, polishing his already immaculate SUV, a weekend ritual he never missed. He looked up in surprise as I pulled in, his face a mixture of confusion and instant guarded apprehension. He knew this wasn't a social call. I got out of the car and walked straight up to him, my purse clutched in my hand like a weapon. I didn't waste a single word on pleasantries. "I just got back from a little trip, Michael," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "A trip to Somerset, Ohio, our official hometown." He stopped polishing, his hand frozen in midair. The friendly suburban dad mask dropped, revealing the anxious, guarded man I knew was underneath. "What are you talking about, Eleanor? Why would you go there?" "I wanted to see the old house. I wanted to see my school," I said, my eyes locked on his, daring him to look away. He couldn't. But a funny thing happened. I went to the library. I spent hours looking through old yearbooks and town records. There's no record of a Price family ever living at 412 Maple Street. There's no record of a little girl named Eleanor Price ever attending Northwood Elementary. It's almost as if we were never there at all. Because we weren't, were we, Michael? He threw the polishing rag onto the hood of the car, his face pale. "You have to stop this," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're messing with things you don't understand." "Then make me understand," I shot back, my voice finally cracking with the fury I had been suppressing. "I am 60 years old and I don't know where I grew up. I don't know who I am. That is not a little thing you can just brush under the rug." He looked around frantically, as if worried the neighbors might hear. He grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the side of the house, away from the street.
Fine, he finally spat out, his resistance crumbling under my direct assault. You want to know? Fine. We never lived in Somerset. It was a story we made up. I waited, my heart pounding. There was an accident, Eleanor, he said, his voice dropping to a pained whisper. A bad one, when you were 8. After it happened, we couldn't stay. We had to leave. We moved to Wisconsin. We changed our name. We started over. All of it. We did it to protect you, to give you a fresh start, a life without the baggage of what happened before. His eyes pleaded with me, begging me to be satisfied with this new, terrifying breadcrumb of truth. We did it for you, Ellie. We saved you from a past that would have destroyed you. Can't you just be grateful for the happy life you had and leave it alone? Please. I stared at my brother, the man I thought I had known my whole life. He wasn't just a liar. He was a gatekeeper. He and my mother were the self-appointed guardians of a past they had deemed too terrible for me to know. And his partial confession, his plea for me to be grateful for the gilded cage they had built around me, didn't bring me peace. It only opened up a new, darker, and more terrifying question. What, in God's name, had happened before? I left my brother's house with the bitter taste of a half-truth in my mouth. It was worse than a lie. A lie you can fight, you can disprove. But a half-truth is a locked door with no key. He had admitted to the conspiracy, but in the same breath, he had sanctified it, painting their deception as a noble act of protection. He wanted me to be grateful for my own ignorance. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. I drove home in a cold fury. I finally understood. My family was a fortress, and its walls were built of a shared, stubborn silence. My mother, my brother, they were the guards at the gate, and they would never willingly let me see the prisoner they were protecting. And the prisoner was me, my real self, the girl who had lived before the age of 8. For days, I was adrift in a sea of questions. What kind of accident leaves a scar on your skull and erases your life? What baggage was so terrible that my family felt they had to amputate my entire past to save me? I felt like a ghost in my own home, my own life. Every photograph on my mantelpiece, every piece of furniture felt like a prop in a play. The path forward, I realized, could not go through my family. I needed a truth that they hadn't curated, a fact that they couldn't deny or soften with appeals to my own good. The idea came to me on a sleepless Tuesday night during a late-night television commercial. It was an advertisement for one of those DNA ancestry websites. A woman with tears in her eyes hugged a man she had just discovered was her long-lost brother. The tagline flashed on the screen, "Discover the story only your DNA can tell." It was a lightning bolt. My family had rewritten my history, my documents, my memories, but they couldn't rewrite my blood. The next morning, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, I sat down at my old computer. With shaking fingers, I typed in the website address. I entered my credit card information and ordered the DNA kit. It felt like an act of profound betrayal, a rebellion against the loving, protective bubble my family had built for me. But it was a bubble I could no longer breathe in. When the small white box arrived a week later, I stared at it for a full day before I had the courage to open it. Inside were sterile plastic vials and long cotton swabs. It all looked so clinical, so scientific for what felt like an act of spiritual excavation. I followed the instructions, swabbing the inside of my cheek, my hand steady now with purpose. I sealed my DNA into the biohazard bag, placed it in the prepaid envelope, and dropped it in the mail that very afternoon. And then the waiting began. It was a unique and terrible kind of limbo. For the next few weeks, my life was defined by the refresh button on my email inbox. Every ping from my computer sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was swinging between wild hope and paralyzing fear. Hope that I would find a connection, a name, a piece of the truth, and fear of what that truth might be. What if it was so monstrous that my family was right to hide it from me? I had sent a piece of myself out into the world, a silent question addressed to a database of strangers. That little vial of saliva was a lottery ticket to a life I never knew I'd lost. It could come back with nothing, leaving me trapped forever in my family's fog. Or it could come back with a truth so devastating that it would make me wish I had never asked the question in the first place. The only thing I knew for sure was that an answer was coming, and I wasn't remotely ready for it.
The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks and a lifetime after I had mailed my DNA into the void. The subject line was deceptively simple. Your ancestry DNA results are ready. I stared at it for a full 10 minutes, my coffee growing cold beside me, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. Everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and my 60 years on this earth was condensed into a single clickable link. A part of me, a large, terrified part, wanted to drag the email into the trash folder, to leave the door locked, to go back to the comfortable, quiet river of my life, even if it was a lie. But I couldn't. The need to know was a physical hunger now, a gnawing ache that had consumed me for weeks. With a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, I clicked the link. The website was bright and cheerful, full of smiling faces and colorful pie charts. My ethnicity estimate was a predictable mix of English, German, and Irish heritage. It told me nothing. I scrolled past the generic information, my eyes searching for the one tab that mattered: DNA relatives. I clicked it. The page loaded, a long, scrolling list of names. Fifth cousin, fourth cousin, distant cousin, hundreds of them, strangers connected to me by a single ancient drop of shared blood. My heart sank. It was nothing. A list of DNA echoes. My family had covered their tracks too well. And then I saw it. At the very top of the list, set apart from the others under a bold heading, were 2 entries. The first was Michael Price, listed as a close family match. Of course, my brother, my cousin. The system had correctly identified our close genetic link, but it was the entry right below his that made the air leave my lungs. Close family, first cousin, Daniel Kowalski. Kowalski? The name was completely foreign to me. I had never known a Kowalski in my life. A first cousin. That meant we shared a grandparent. This was not a distant echo. This was a direct link to the life I had before. I clicked on his name. His profile was sparse, just a picture of a kind-looking man in his late 50s with a warm smile and a friendly-looking golden retriever. There was a button next to his name. Message. I spent an hour writing and deleting, trying to find the right words. How do you contact a stranger and ask him to unlock the secrets of your entire existence? In the end, I kept it simple, framing my story in the most straightforward way I could. Hello, Daniel. My name is Eleanor, and I believe we are first cousins. I was adopted as a child and have recently begun searching for my biological family. Your name came up as my closest match. I know this is a strange request, but any information you might have about a lost relative, a baby girl given up for adoption around 1963, would mean the world to me. Thank you. I hit send, my whole body trembling. I expected to wait for days, or weeks, or maybe forever. The reply came in less than an hour. The email notification made me jump. I opened it with a feeling of pure dread. Eleanor, his message began. Oh my God, Eleanor, is it really you? Your last name isn't Price, it's Novak. Your father was my mother's brother, Adam Novak. I read on.
the world dissolving around me into a meaningless blur of shapes and colors. Daniel's words painted a picture of a past so dark, so tragic, it made my mother's fabricated story of a fall from a swing seem like a kindness. He told me about the accident. It wasn't a fall, it was a car crash, a head-on collision on a rainy night on a rural highway 52 years ago. My biological father, Adam, had been driving. He had been drinking. He swerved into an oncoming lane and was killed instantly. I, his 8-year-old daughter, was in the passenger seat. I was thrown from the car, sustaining a severe head injury and a fractured skull. But the most devastating part, the part that made a low, wounded sound escape my own throat, was what came next. My biological mother, Anna, who was at home, was so consumed by grief and guilt over her husband's death that she had a complete nervous breakdown. She couldn't cope. After a week of me lying unconscious in the hospital, she walked out and disappeared, abandoning me. The family, Daniel wrote, was thrown into chaos. My mother's sister, the woman I knew as my mother, and her husband, the man I knew as my father, stepped in. Fearing I would be lost to a broken foster care system and wanting to shield me from the horrific truth of my father's death and my mother's abandonment, they made a desperate choice. They legally adopted me, moved across the country to Wisconsin, changed my last name to their own, and built a new reality around me. A better, happier life, burying the old one completely. My brother, Michael, was indeed my first cousin. The screen in front of me wasn't just a web page. It was the gravestone of the life I thought I knew. My father was a ghost I couldn't mourn, and my mother was a wound I never knew I had. The loving lie my family had built had crumbled into dust, and now I was standing in the ruins holding the terrible, jagged pieces of the truth. There was only one thing left to do. I had to face my creators.
The truth, once known, is a demanding thing. It cannot be unknown. It sat with me for 2 days, a heavy, indigestible lump in my soul. The emails from my cousin Daniel were printed out, a neat stack of papers on my desk that represented the complete demolition of my life. I had been grieving a lie. I had been loving people who were not who they said they were. I was a 60-year-old orphan who had only just learned it. I did not call them with anger. I called them with a quiet, chilling calm. "I need you to come over," I said to my mother, my aunt, Catherine. "All of you. Michael, too. There's something we need to discuss." They gathered in my living room that evening, the same living room where we'd celebrated countless Christmases and birthdays. They sat together on the sofa, a united front of loving deception. My mother, Catherine, her hands trembling in her lap. My father, George, his face grim and pale. And Michael, my cousin, my brother, looking at me with terrified, pleading eyes. They knew. They knew I had found something out. I didn't pace or raise my voice. I sat in the armchair across from them, the printed emails in my lap. "I took a DNA test," I began, my voice steady. The blood drained from my mother's face. It came back with a match, a first cousin named Daniel Kowalski. I paused, letting the name hang in the air. His mother was my mother's sister. My mother, Anna Novak. I watched them as I spoke, as I calmly, methodically laid out the story Daniel had told me. The story of Adam and Anna Novak. The story of the rainy night, the drunk driver, the car crash. The story of a father killed and a daughter orphaned, not just by death, but by a mother's unbearable grief. As I spoke the names of my real parents, I felt like an actor in a Greek tragedy, narrating a fate that was mine, yet felt like it belonged to someone else. When I finished,
The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother Catherine's ragged sobs. She was the first to break. "We did it to protect you," she wept, the words she had been holding back for 52 years, spilling out. "We did it out of love. Your mother, my sister Anna, she was destroyed. She was a ghost. She looked at you in that hospital bed, and she saw him. She saw the accident. She couldn't be a mother to you anymore. She would have broken you too." "We saw you lying there," my father George added, his voice thick with ancient pain. "So small and broken, and we heard the doctors talking. Foster care, the system. We couldn't let that happen. We couldn't let you be lost. So we took you. We ran. We thought we could build a better world for you, a world without all that darkness." I listened to their confession, to their story of desperate, misguided love. The anger I thought I would feel wasn't there. In its place was just a vast, empty canyon of sorrow. "Protect me," I finally said, my voice a raw whisper. "You didn't protect me. You erased me. I looked at each of them, these people who were my entire world, and for the first time, I saw them as flawed, terrified human beings who made an impossible choice. You took away my right to grieve my own father. You let me believe for 60 years that he was a good man who died of a heart attack, not a man who died from a mistake that almost killed me too. You took away my mother. You turned her into a monster who abandoned me when she was just a woman who was broken by a grief you never let me share. You didn't protect me from the pain. You just amputated my past and told me to be grateful I could still walk." The tears were streaming down my face now. All I ever had was a story about pneumonia. A lie. You built my entire life on a lie. You didn't give me a clean page. You just gave me a blank one. There was nothing left to say. They sat there, weeping, their good intentions exposed as the devastating act of theft they truly were. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I just felt the colossal, crushing weight of 52 years stolen. Later that night, long after they had gone, I sat alone in my study. In front of me was the scrapbook I had started for my granddaughter Lily, the project that had unwittingly started this whole avalanche. Its pages were all empty, a blank history waiting to be written. I picked up a pen. My hand was steady. I opened the book to the first page. For 60 years, I had been a character in a story written by someone else. Now, it was time to write my own. I lowered the pen to the crisp white paper and wrote the first true words of my life. My name is Eleanor Novak.